Hello and welcome back to Granted Gardens. It is Sunday afternoon and this is a video that I've been really excited to sit down and plan for a while now. This is going to be our do's and don'ts video. So we've learned a lot over this last year and we've come up with, a touch of a game plan for stuff that we're going to do a little bit differently next year, measuring the stuff that went really well versus the stuff that we bombed on. So we're going to share some of our do's and don'ts from our 2019 spring summer garden. So I'm going to start out. The first and foremost that I really want to share with everyone is plant in pots. So this is something that I get a question about pretty regularly, and everyone's like, wow, your garden looks so great, but I just don't have that kind of space where I live. And I always tell them, go back to our videos and look at our pots videos, because we had so many pots that did so good this year. And it really, granted, it took up quite a bit of deck space, but this is something that you should have at least a little bit of space. You can grow a couple plants and they can be prolific. So planting in pots, definitely number one if you're worried about space. The tomatoes specifically did really well in pots for us. I was actually surprised that my tomatoes in pots did better than my tomatoes in the raised garden beds. So tomatoes do well in pots, specifically my Juliet tomato, which you guys have seen in some of my videos. Juliet held on till we ripped her out, till the frost, and even then she still had flowers on her. And I felt so bad about ripping her out, but it was just time. She got massive. We did have her in a really big pot, so that probably helped a little bit, and perhaps if she would have had more space, maybe she would have given us even more tomatoes. But the Juliet tomato, if you haven't heard of it, look into it. It was well worth growing. And I do want to add, we're zone 7A, so if that makes a difference. Also my lettuce. So I did lettuce in the spring and I did lettuce in the fall, and I did them both times in pots, and we've just been picking lettuce like crazy. It's done amazing. So lettuce is another thing that is something you can eat every day. You can grow very easily in a pot with very little space. We actually even brought in some of our lettuce plants when the fall started to hit into winter, and they're still doing great. Like, I can still go and pick from them. I have not recently, but it's on the to-do list. Next, the fence around the garden beds. So if you watched us from the beginning of this summer, we didn't have the fence up. I think we didn't even have the second garden bed yet. We may have had the second garden bed. But we kind of decided that we were going to try and put up a fence around the raised garden beds, because we were getting some kind of a critter last year that was coming in, just taking one bite of a tomato and leaving the rest of the tomato, and so it was all trash. This fence that we put up, we did not have a problem with anything like that this year. So I don't know if it was fate or luck, I don't know, but the fence definitely made a difference. Going into that, if you've seen our videos, we did not go out and buy this fence. This fence was upcycled from my parents, because they were actually taking their fence down at their house. So it's rusty, it's old, it's not pretty, but it did the job that we needed it to do, and we didn't spend a dime on it. Other than that, I did get the T-posts for the fence. I bought the first few of them, but then I follow something online that's called Free Cycle, or our yard sale on Facebook, our community yard sale. I found somebody that was really close to me that was selling T-posts for $1 a piece. So for a few bucks, I had enough T-posts to finish off the fence around the garden beds. So if you are not involved in something like that in your community, look for it and sign up, because it can be a huge money saver when it comes to starting your first garden. In addition to that, something I found afterwards was I started dabbling in plant and seed swaps. I didn't know this existed back when we first started our garden. We were going to Home Depot and
nurseries, but we bought everything.
And then I started getting into these plant and seed swaps, and there are people that are giving away awesome stuff for free or for swapping out plants. So definitely look into that. That can save you a lot of money, but in addition, it can save you a lot of time, because if they're going to be swapping plants, then you're already getting a half started plant. You don't have to invest the time in growing them from seed. Our arch that we put up this year was one of my favorite things. I was really excited about that. That's definitely on my do side, partially because
Do it right.
because it saves up garden space. So our arch went from one raised bed to the other, and we were then utilizing that space to grow food when in reality it would have just been a walkway. It would have been a complete waste of space. So arches are a win. On the arches, I will absolutely back up do peas. So the peas that I had in there I got from the dollar store, and I think they just were labeled garden peas, but they did so well. They did so well for our summer garden, and then they came when I planted them again, and they did stellar for the fall garden. So peas on that arch were definitely a win, plus they just look gorgeous. Our peppers did really well this year, even though like throughout the summer we weren't really picking peppers.
They definitely take time to start.
Yeah, it took a little bit longer than I expected, but come fall, like we were picking peppers right up until the frost came. Specifically my Mad Hatter peppers, if you follow the videos, you know I love them. If you haven't seen that video, please find it. It's on here. It's amazing. Mad Hatters were prolific and delicious. Our cabbages, the cabbages were really fun, I thought, for us to grow. They do take up a lot of space.
Yes.
So that would be the only downfall to it. But going out to the summer garden and seeing these massive like cabbage plants and watching them grow, that was so much fun. And then picking them was awesome, and Tyler does a bunch of really cool stuff with cabbage. We were able to do coleslaw, which is my favorite. I think we did the fermented cabbage too.
The sauerkraut was from ours.
So that was really fun. The beets did really well. I was surprised. That was the first time I ever grew beets. Those did well for us.
I love beets.
Yeah, and there's a lot you can do with them.
Pickled beets.
Absolutely.
Pickled eggs.
And then the cucumbers. Cucumbers were just crazy this year.
30 jars of pickles. A lifetime supply.
Honestly, the cucumbers were a win. We had a ton of them. We could have done a lot more with them. We went towards the pickle route because that's my favorite. But we literally have pickles for like a couple years, I feel like. In addition to that, the cucamelons, which you've seen in videos, we were picking them like crazy every single day. And I think even after when we ripped them out after the frost, there was like cucamelons falling off of it. So we didn't even really pick all of them. Stuff for next year that I'm looking forward to trying out that I've actually gotten some seeds for from the seed swaps that I've done. Number one, loofahs. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. I have to do some homework on growing them still because I'm not entirely sure that I know how to care for them or what to do with them after I pick them, but I'll get there. I think that that'll be a lot of fun, and I've seen people that have grown them and you just get a ton on like one plant, so I'm pretty excited about that. Purple pole beans I got in one of my seed swaps, so that I'm excited about on an arch because we're going to be doing new arches next year. Pumpkins, I was disappointed when Halloween came around and we didn't have pumpkins. So I'm gonna give a shot at pumpkins next year. The sunflowers did really, really well. This was my first year ever growing sunflowers, and I was really surprised that I did so well with it. I mean, they got pretty big. They definitely weren't the largest sunflowers after we went to the Frederick Fair and saw some of the ones that were there. Here I thought that I did so well with my sunflowers, but those were really fun. That was fun to do. And then just kind of circling back around to the seed swaps. If you're interested in doing seed swaps, but you don't feel like you have enough seeds to share, grow one sunflower and you will have plenty of seeds to go and do your seed swaps with. In general, we just had talked about, you know, growing more flowers in a few of our areas, which I think Tyler's going to touch on that. And then, you know, again, branching off of the seed swaps, collect seeds. This was something that was never ever big on my priority list. It was not something that I was ever taught growing up. It was just, we didn't do it. We bought our plants, and so once I started dabbling and collecting seeds and realized how easy it was, because it is fairly simple on a lot of things, Some things are harder than others.
Basil.
Yeah.
Basil's hard to collect seeds.
Yeah. But like lettuce, for example, so easy. So easy. And we grew all of our fall lettuce from our seeds from our summer garden. So collect seeds. And even if it is something that you didn't really care for, like maybe you didn't like the taste of it, that's fine. Collect those seeds, dry them, and swap them with people on your social network community or with people in your own community for something that you would like. Somebody else might like those. Another do for me, which was huge, and I have to thank Tyler wholeheartedly for it, because it would not have happened if he didn't do it. I always had this really big dream of having an herb bed, and I loved the idea of herbs, but I really had never done much with them outside of, you know, like buying salt and pepper or rosemary from the store. You know, that was the extent. So it was all a learning curve for me. When he came in, he put that herb bed in, and we planted all those herbs this year. We were using stuff left and right, and we're still now coming up with new ways to use our herbs that we dried before the frost. So if you're really interested in doing herbs and you don't want to take up the space in your raised garden beds or in your vegetable garden,
just put in another one.
just put in another one. But this is so real for me, because if I had actually gone in and planted all the herbs I wanted in my raised beds, I would not have had room for my food. To chime in on that a little bit more, the chamomile. So if you've seen my videos of how to harvest chamomile, every single day in the summer I was out there and I would count them. I would get like 100 to 200 flowers of chamomile every single time I went out. And that's something that we drink in our teas all the time. So I loved that. That plant was well worth the money I spent on it. And then one last thing was more cilantro. We love cilantro. We like eating Mexican food, and you just cannot have enough cilantro. So, Tyler, what do you have on your do's list?
Kale. Kale around here does really good. Even through the summer when stuff starts getting hot, like peas and beans kind of took a hit when we got into, we'll say, like late June, early July. They pretty much all died off. Even some of the peppers kind of got a little scrawny after that. Dill is also one of those very prolific herbs, and if you like dill as much as we do, we use it a lot. But even if you don't, you can save that and give it as gifts. It always produces a lot of seeds. The one thing that you have to pay attention to is trimming them down. If you're constantly picking from the sides or low, you're only going to increase its height, and that's when we've noticed it starts to try to bolt a lot. So if you actually pick straight from the top and kind of keep it trimmed height-wise, it'll bush out, but at least if it's growing outward, it usually doesn't try to bolt as fast. Peppers in pots. That's one thing that if you don't want to take up the room in your beds, you can easily put them in pots, and we've had no problems having peppers in pots at all. Tomatoes in pots too, they always work. The problem is when you start letting them get a little big, they can get kind of root bound in there, and there may be a connection between like more utilization of fertilizer to keep them from kind of binding themselves out or consuming all the dirt, because when we pulled Juliet out of that pot, it was one complete root mass with maybe 20% of the dirt that was in there initially was like gone, just ate it up. Potatoes, you can easily put them in the ground. Where we live, pretty much you get 1 inch of okay loose dirt at the top, the rest is pure clay. Potatoes like loose soil, not compact soil. I thought in the beginning when I first started planting potatoes that they liked compact dirt. Lies. Very loose dirt. So if you're going to put them in the ground, make sure you do a copious amount of soil conditioning before you start. Otherwise, pots or even buckets, I've had significant success keeping all of my potatoes in buckets, and they grow pretty well. I'll touch on a little bit of that in a second. And then herbs in pots, like Melissa mentioned, keeping them in pots just lets you save a lot of space elsewhere, and most herbs don't get to be a gigantic size. So keeping them in like medium to small pots, especially if you're constantly picking them like us, it'll keep them in check so they won't get too out of control. The main do's that I have for potatoes, like I said, growing them in buckets, If you have a bucket this big, you'll actually start it halfway and plant them and cover them with just a little bit of dirt. And then once the eyes start coming up and you see that plant, you'll let them rise until they get another set of leaves at the top, and then you'll cover the rest. And you'll keep doing that till you pretty much fill up the bucket. And when you do that, you're creating a better root system for you to grow potatoes off of. So where I would usually fill the bucket up and then put them in the top, the plants would still get enormous, but I was finding that the potatoes would only grow in about the first 8 to 10 inches of dirt, and 10 inches being the max. Generally by that depth down, you're only getting like almost little itty bitty seed potatoes. Another thing with them is don't crowd them out. For a standard like 5-gallon bucket, 3 plants in there is more than enough. I kind of overdid it with most of mine. I was putting like 5 or 6, 7 a lot in there. Then you would get this big bushy plant coming out of there with a bunch of stalks, which was good, but I think that keeping them lower and letting them utilize the dirt more is a better choice. They also like very consistent water. Not to say that you want to overwater them, but get on a schedule. Every few days water them. You can let them kind of dry out completely, and when you do that, you force the roots to come down, which will also give you more production down in those deeper layers of dirt. And then a good fertilizer for them is always a good choice. Potatoes are very voracious eaters, so they pull a lot of the nutrients out of the dirt. So if you ever do a bucket of potatoes, like me, you'll notice that at the very bottom where the roots are really trying to pull most of the nutrients out of, you end up almost with clay down there. They suck a lot of the good stuff out of the dirt, and you really just want to give them 3 to 4 good feedings throughout their life cycle. Another do is BT spray. When I first started doing the garden this year, we had some broccoli and cauliflower in pots. I think we lost every single one of those plants to those little green cabbage worms. Nothing worked. We tried 7, which is a pretty notorious bug killer. Didn't do much of anything. They worked right through it. But BT spray is amazing. From the first time I added that to, well, the cauliflower and broccoli were already dead, but the kale specifically this year, still getting eaten up by worms, but we put the BT spray on. I've only had to apply it twice since we first put them in, and we've had almost no problems except for the week that the BT spray probably wore it off from the last application to the one I just did. Onions, definitely do in loose soil too. You don't want to put them in something compact because it keeps them pretty small. And plenty of sun. You would think that you could plant them under stuff, just sporadically through your beds, but you can't. They don't really do too well. Yeah, and that's pretty much it for do's.
So I think my list of do's was longer than my don'ts. Yeah?
Yeah.
That's good, right?
It means we're doing something right.
So I'm actually impressed by that. So, okay, so quick going through my don'ts. Number 1 is do not use chicken wire for your arches in your gardens. Y'all saw the videos. It collapsed on us twice this year. I mean, we were trying to like put all kinds of things to hold it up. By the end of the fall garden, just let it go. So we've actually already cut down the chicken wire off of the arch. So we're gonna do different arches next year. We've got some materials that were upcycled. Hopefully they're gonna do better. Slicers for the bed, the far raised bed. Again, if you're following the videos, I got hardly any slicer tomatoes this year, and the ones that I did get were like tiny. So they failed. I don't know why. I think we're gonna try and plant them in a different bed that might get more sunlight next year, see if that makes a difference. Carrots I put on my don't list just because we didn't do good with them. I think that I pulled like 2 and they were bitty. And again, I put it on my don't list. Not that I wouldn't do carrots, I just think that I need to learn how to do carrots before I do them again. Same situation with my corn, but that corn was like, that was a plant swap corn and I wasn't totally invested. So maybe next year I'll do a little bit different. The cucumbers on the far back wall, like the lattice, is a don't for me for 2 reasons. That back fence is shared with our neighbors. So number 1, cucumbers were growing on the other side of the fence. Not that we don't like to share, but we weren't getting our cucumbers. Number two, they have a lot of like poison that grows through their side of the fence, so I was having to like dodge poison to pick my cucumbers. So we're gonna do that a little bit differently, maybe grow them along the fence line next year. The beans in the fall didn't do good for me, not sure why. Did really, really well for me in the summer, but in the fall I think that we got maybe like 5 beans out of 4 plants, so didn't work for me. My biggest one, if you are having any kind of construction done on your house, move your plants, dig them up and move them, because so many of my plants that were planted around the edge of the house when we were getting our siding done were just destroyed. And this was my first experience doing siding. I didn't know what to expect, but I was really devastated with how little effort was put into saving our plants around the house. So that's my don't list.
So for don'ts, most of what I have is just on kind of what I was trying to pay attention to. Cilantro, same thing with dill, loves to bolt. The warmer it gets outside, the faster it tries to. So again, with cilantro, you really need to be out there picking it almost all the time. Mainly from the top, like I said, is best. That way you can produce a more bushy plant, gives you more herb to actually utilize. So keeping the tops trimmed generally will give you a lot more time to keep it from bolting. And then just seed starts. When you start in the spring, you really want to put them in a room or an area that has a lot of natural sunlight. If you don't have a lot of natural sunlight like we do, we usually keep it by our back sliding glass door, and there's only one other small window in there that's not facing a good direction to pull sunlight in. So everything would always get really leggy. And specifically the kale, I notice when it gets leggy like that, when you actually do finally get it to put it in the ground, because it's so leggy, it starts with a very floppy bottom stem, and a lot of things will just droop and fall over. And mainly when things are touching the dirt like that, they don't often do too well. But that's pretty much all my don'ts. Overcrowding. Don't overcrowd your beds. We, this year, and it's been a very experimental year, that we tried to put as much as we could in those beds. And one, I think it pulls a lot of nutrients out of the soil very fast doing that. And then we tried to add some more under the ground plants in the same beds as our above ground plants. We did onions and beets while we were still growing, tomatoes, cucumbers, all kinds of stuff down there, and they just did not produce much of anything. And I'm sure that's just because they got shaded out by the taller plants. So next year we actually are going to try to start an in-ground garden just for more of the in-ground plants like beets and stuff like that. But that's pretty much all the don'ts that I have. Pay attention. Don't overwater. Our first year,
that was the problem last year,
that we started, we had an automatic watering system that we had set up, but maybe it was because of our laziness, we didn't want to come out and turn the hose off, so it could be raining and it was still watering
every day
and nothing
for 15 minutes.
Nothing enjoyed that. Maybe
really
if we had some cattails or some other swamp-like plants, it would have grown pretty well back there, but definitely not for your vegetables. But that's pretty much it for don'ts.
Well, thank you guys so much for following us along for this journey. I am really excited to say that you guys have pretty much been with us since the beginning of the spring when we started our bed. So we are like 1 season down. Looking forward to
bigger and brighter things next year.
So I really appreciate you guys following us along. Thank you so much for all your support and for watching us. Please do make sure that you stay tuned to our channel. We've been getting a little bit more creative with videos that we're doing, so keep your eye out, and we look forward to sharing more with you soon.